What do you want me to do for you?" Twice, Jesus asked it. First of the Zebedee brothers and then of Bartimaeus. Twice over the course of just a few verses, he asked the same question, but the circumstances couldn't have been more different. In the first case, James and John, two of Jesus' inner circle of followers, approached and asked Jesus to do whatever they asked him. What they wanted was to be appointed the top cabinet seats once the new regime they were envisioning was established. The revolution was barely underway and they were already calculating the benefits of their association with Christ, the Anointed One in the new administration. Swept up in the idea that Jesus was up to something big, they completely missed the critical details, the bits about mocking, flogging, spitting, and death, not to mention the part about the first being last. Instead, they fixated on that throne he was bound to occupy once Caesar was taken down. Surely, Jesus will be handing out posts and privileges, and somebody's got to sit next to him, so why not us? Turns out, handing out entitlements was not in Jesus' job description. Reminding his followers that greatness would be measured by acts of service was. In the very next scene, Jesus and his disciples pass by Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, described as a blind beggar. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus was near, he called out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." The gospel writer reports that in response, many sternly ordered him to be quiet. Have you ever noticed how quickly we can forget our own backstory once we've been welcomed into the in crowd? How we can forget what it was like to be downtrodden or sidelined, to utterly rely on the mercy of others? Do we ever pat ourselves on the back for our own perceived successes and turn a blind eye to those who continue to flounder? The crowd following Jesus, it was filled with former outcasts, fishermen from backwater towns, lepers miraculously healed, and tax collectors recently forgiven. And yet, when Bartimaeus cried out, they shushed him. After all they had been through, after everything Jesus had been saying about welcoming the last and the least, after explaining yet again that this is not about leaving anyone behind, they still failed to see Bartimaeus as anything other than a hassle. Bartimaeus was undeterred. He called out again, and Jesus stood still, came to a halt right in the middle of the road. It makes me wonder what stopped Jesus in his tracks like that, whether it was the cries of Bartimaeus or just maybe the bossy shushing of the crowd. Whether it might just have been an expression of exasperation, a full-body facepalm directed not at the supplicant sitting roadside, but at those who had been following Jesus and supposedly listening to him all this time. Followers like the Zebedee brothers, who should have known better than to scold the man, who should have seen what Jesus saw, but who missed it completely, so preoccupied were they with their own current and future status. "Call him over," Jesus said. And Bartimaeus threw off his cloak and sprang up like someone who'd just been picked for his 4th grade kickball team. When he reached Jesus, the teacher asked him that same question he had posed to James and John. "What do you want?" me to do for you? And this time, the question must have pulled the crowd up short. What does he want? Well, isn't it obvious? He's a blind man. Don't you think he wants to see? Why waste time asking? But friends, here's what makes this such a stunning moment. It wasn't obvious. Not to Jesus, because Jesus didn't assume anything. This, friends, is the life-transforming moment that liberates every one of us who has ever been put in a box. Anyone who has ever suffered the assumptions of strangers, been reduced to a label or inserted into a story that someone else has already written. This moment is for anyone who has ever been told, you are your disability, your addiction, your political party, your economic status. This is a moment for anyone who knows what it's been like to turn two-dimensional. Obviously, he wants his sight back. He's blind. But that's not where Jesus went. He did not presume that he knew anything about Bartimaeus. He did not assess the situation from afar and march in with a solution. He did not say, I know what you need to be saved. Have you ever had someone give you help for which you did not ask and for which you were not looking? A seminary student who happens to be sight impaired described how often strangers at the train station assume that she wants them to grab her elbow and guide her through the crowd, when all she really wants is for someone to ask whether she needs directions and then allow her to make her own way. That's what Jesus did. He asked a question. Invited Bartimaeus to speak for himself, to tell his own story, to speak his own truth. Because what he saw wasn't Bartimaeus, the blind man, but Bartimaeus, the person. In the words of the novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, whose TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story, you're invited to watch with me later this morning. The problem with stereotypes is that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Adichie is a Nigerian woman and a writer. She's been told that her novels are not African enough. She's a Nigerian writer. But her novels are not African enough because they don't dwell on the political upheaval and tribal conflicts that some of us associate with African nations. To insist on only these negative experiences, she says, is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of their dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. Standing there before Jesus in the middle of the road, Bartimaeus did ask for his sight. But he might just as easily have asked for something else. Healing for an illness less visible to the casual observer. Comfort in the wake of heartbreak. Care for his children. Food for his family. He might have asked for a dozen different things because Bartimaeus had more than one story. As did James and John and every person standing in the dusty road that afternoon. Jesus understood this because he had refined the art of seeing. of noticing the people around him. Jesus asked questions because he knew that there is always more going on just beneath the surface, more beauty, more pain, more longing to be made whole. Perhaps this is what Jesus most wanted the disciples and all of us to see. That salvation, which means healing and wholeness, never is about the positions you acquire. It's about the people you see, really see, in all their three-dimensional complexity. It's about looking directly into each other's eyes and realizing that after all, there is one story that we share. Whether we walk or wheel through life, whether we see with our eyes or with our heart, whether we hang out in the halls of Congress or the side of the road or in a halfway house or in the unemployment line or at the therapist's office, whether we are struggling with loneliness or illness or doubt or a crushing debt, whether we are celebrating the birth of a grandchild or admission to college or another day clean and sober, this much is always true, that we are all human, members of the same human family, complicated, incomplete, stumbling, growing, beloved of God. Do you see? Do we truly see one another? Then, friends, let us lean in. Ask more questions. Listen with rapt attention. Discover what God is up to, not just within us, but between us. And so, by our faith in the one who sees every one of us, may we answer Christ's call to see and to serve and to love one another into wholeness. May it be so. Thanks be to God.